there's such a real problem in terms of the economic situation of young African-American males.
Exactly.
I think that when you look at the statistics for today,
Yeah.
you find that they represent a large element of the population whose unemployment is greater than any other area. And so not only is it the killing of African-American males, but it also has an aspect in terms of their economic deprivation and their social deprivation and et cetera.
That's an excellent question. And we often forget that when we go on social media and we check out the Black Lives Matter movement, we think it's only about racial profiling and police brutality and misconduct. It's also about poverty and economic injustice. They're very much concerned. Alicia Garza and others who are heading this movement are concerned about poverty and economic injustice, about teenage pregnancy, about incarceration rates in the black community. So it's a movement about the sacredness of black life, that black people must be concerned about black lives, that they must consider black lives sacred, and that the larger society and culture should also embrace this idea of the sacredness, the dignity and worth of black human personality. That's what it's about.
Very good. And so however you look at it, whether we're talking about the immediate destruction of black life, or whether we're talking about a slow destruction of black life through the inability for most individuals to get work and create a situation where they are always at one another's throats and et cetera, that's all part of it. The treatment,
part of it,
in a real sense, of the young African-American male.
Yes, it's not only about police brutality and racial profiling, it's about what happens internally in the black community, is that black people themselves must respect the sacredness of black life, which means, hey, we have to deal with black on black crime, as well as police brutality and misconduct, as well as vigilantism, which results in the deaths of black males. We must deal with all of these issues.
And of course, Dr. Baldwin, we're going to take this second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
All right,
so,
all right.
Yes. Black Lives Matter. And now you want to know, where do we go from here?
Where are we going from here? Is the movement going to sustain itself, or is it just a fad?
Well, it looks like it has already sustained itself from the very, very beginning.
Worldwide media attention.
Yeah, from slavery. It's just wider. You see, I think
black bodies are important, I think. And as long as there's police brutality, the movement would exist.
Yeah, you talk about police brutality and whatever, and then you think about Willie Lynch.
Yeah.
You know, that's,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of stuff out on the internet dealing with Willie Lynch.
Oh, you
I got
do?
the whole Willie Lynch letter, man. You'd be surprised if you ever go out there and see that, man. I got the whole...
I got to check that out.
Yes, sir. Life and Times of Willie Lynch.
Okay.
Yes, about almost 18 hours of it. Yes. I'm surprised how they kept it out there, but you know.
Okay.
That's from Dockery, I think. Yeah.
Who is that?
That's Dockery, my second guess. Reuben Dockery.
Okay.
You might know him, I think.
I think I know him, yeah.
He's going to talk about some. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. we're talking to Dr. Baldwin, and he's giving us some information in reference to the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement. And he's also giving us information in reference to the historical aspect of that movement. So, Dr. Baldwin, let's, during this last segment, pick up and give you an opportunity to try to bring in as much information as you possibly can during this last segment to highlight what we're talking about here, dealing with the so-called Black Lives Matter movement, the contemporary version of that movement.
I think we have to consider the question of where that movement goes from here. I think it is an extension of the civil rights movement, because if you look at the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and Ella Baker, John Lewis, they all raised the question of the preservation, the value of black bodies. And I think that the Black Lives Matter movement is building on that, and I think it's going to continue to be a major movement because it has attracted worldwide media. It's a movement that, as I said earlier, is respected around the world. There are 23 chapters, one in Canada, there's one in Ghana. So I think the movement will continue to blossom and evolve because there will be...
the issues are always the same, no matter where you go. It's always a deprivation of young African-American males.
African-American lives.
So I guess, wherever.
Yeah, you know. Every 48 hours, there's some black male, woman or child murdered by vigilantes, by hate groups, or by policemen. So that movement, I think, will blossom. And I think because of social media, because of the internet, it will become as important, this is my prediction, as the civil rights movement. When you talk about 700 demonstrations that have occurred since 2013 up to this point in connection with the Black Lives Matter movement, you're talking about a major movement. So we need to move away from this idea that the Black Lives Matter movement is a slogan, that it is a rallying cry, to develop a sense of it as a movement. And as long as black lives are in jeopardy because of poverty, because of racism, because of economic injustice, you're going to have a Black Lives Matter movement. It's a historical movement with an unbroken tradition, and I think we have to keep that in mind.
And it's still dealing with the same basic question in reference to the subjects.
Exactly.
In reference to this movement. No matter where you look, as you've already explained in American history, you're going to find out the same problems, the same deprivation, the same lynchings, the same burnings, and all of those things that happen. And so, yes.
Throughout our history. And Malcolm and Martin spoke boldly to this issue of police brutality. So when we hear people like Alicia Garza and Patrice Cullors and Oprah Tometi, who are the leaders of this Black Lives movement, they are simply echoing what Martin and Malcolm and Ella Baker and Rosa Parks and others were saying about the sacredness of black bodies and the need to protect black bodies, not only against police brutality, but against these other problems that you raise, such as poverty and economic injustice.
Yes, because if Black Lives Matter dealing with police brutality, they also matter dealing with the inability of African-American males to find jobs, the inability of them to find health. And so it covers the whole thing.
Yes, it spills over into drug addiction, it spills over into teenage pregnancy and other problems that have sort of become prominent in the black community. It's all about the vulnerability of black life. Whether you're talking about economic issues or social issues or cultural issues, the question is, how do we preserve the sacredness, the dignity and worth of black life?
And through all this period, Dr. Baldwin, from the very, very beginning, from slavery on up until now, we're still dealing with the same basic subjects.
Exactly.
And no matter whether you find them in slavery, or whether you find them in modern urban America, they're the same young men between about 16 and 25 or 30 years old that are receiving the attention of this movement in a real sense. And so
it's a problem that is epidemic in our society, and if we don't deal with it, we're going to suffer tragic consequences, and we're already suffering tragic consequences.
And I just want to let you know, Dr. Baldwin, you're doing a great work in terms of making us realize the importance of this movement, because I've seen it on television and I've seen people with signs saying Black Lives Matter. And even though I've been involved in this activity for the longest, you know, I've never thought in terms of this being a part of something that was traditional. I've always known of protests, the NAACP and all other organizations that have protested, anti-lynching movements, and I think you've mentioned all of those, but I never was able to put it together as you are able to put it together here, and to indicate that this is indeed not a recent movement, even though you talk about the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement, that it's contemporary only because it is now which contemporary is, but it also has its historical roots in something that's very, very important.
Yeah, it's a part of an ongoing struggle.
And I certainly appreciate you, as I think we're getting ready for our final words for today, and I certainly appreciate you bringing us by that information and to encourage us, to let us know that there is an historical foundation, and those who might wish to become involved in this movement can continue to become so involved. And so I'm sort of wondering about where we are now. Is this it? Oh, good. We're good. I didn't know. I think.
Well, then you know, I think what we have to do is, if you're interested in the Black Lives Matter movement, you have to become a part of social media, and not only social media, but a part of a movement, because the killing of black men, women, and children will continue. That's not going to stop. As I said earlier, that every 28 hours, according to some statistics, some black woman, male, child, killed by vigilante, police, or hate groups. And we know about the Klan and the neo-Nazis and the Aryan nations and paramilitary groups, all of which promote a kind of racist theology, a racist philosophy. So the Black Lives Matter movement, in my view, will continue to grow and will continue to thrive, because you have the foundation for that kind of thing.
And so in a real sense, the whole movement is not only a continuation, but more people can become involved in such a movement, and it's more, and it's a greater recognition of what is going on in reference to the African American community, within the African American community.
Now, I think we have to go back to this principle of the sacredness of black life, which is not only embodied in Scripture, but in our Constitution. We all have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if we really believe in the sacredness, the dignity, and worth of human life, then we will become a part of this Black Lives Matter movement. Because this is what it's all about. It's not only about protecting the sacredness and the dignity of black life, it's about protecting the sacredness and dignity of life in general.
That's exactly it. And so it's much greater than black people. It's how we treat one another.
Each other. And if we're a country that claims to be a Christian nation, that claims to be wedded to the principles of the Constitution, then we'll take that seriously.
And so in a real sense, this is part of what you might call the civil rights movement, because civil rights...
I think it's an extension of the civil rights movement, because as I said earlier, when you look at the civil rights leaders in the 50s and 60s, they were dealing with police brutality, police misconduct. Malcolm X spoke extensively to Black Panther Party, King, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer. All of these leaders were concerned about police brutality and the intrusion of Klan elements into the police department. So I think we have to consider that in the larger context of what we are talking about.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Baldwin, let me thank you for coming by and giving us that excellent information. And let me also encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.